Olá, bom dia. A gente está transmitindo aqui. Bem-vindos, bem-vindas, todos e todas. A gente vai dar início hoje a mais uma sessão do nosso evento. Só um momento, vamos esperar as pessoas entrarem. Vou esperar mais um minutinho. A gente vai se organizando aqui. Pronto, acho que já estamos prontos para iniciar. Só lembrando que para ouvir a tradução simultânea, a gente precisa clicar lá embaixo no ícone Interpreter ou Interpretação, Interpretation ou Interpretação, e escolher o canal Português, para ouvir a tradução simultânea da fala da Glenna, para quem quiser e precisar. Tá? Eu sou Diego Pizarro, homem branco, de barba grisalha, cabelos grisalhos, levemente grisalhos, usando uma camiseta preta com alguns detalhes azuis. Atrás de mim tem uma parede branca, pedaços de uma estante com livros, outros objetos e uma porta. E eu tenho o prazer de passar a palavra para o Adriano Bittar, que é quem vai mediar essa mesa, e agradecer desde já imensamente a Glenna Batson por ter aceito estar com a gente, compartilhando mais de 5 décadas de experiência com dança, somática e outras práticas maravilhosas. Thank you, Glenna. Adriano.
Obrigado, Diego. É um prazer estar aqui também, gente. Olá a todos e bom dia novamente. Bem-vindos ao segundo Encontro Internacional de Práticas Somáticas e Dança. Meu nome é Adriano Bittar e minha função aqui hoje, então, como dito pelo Diego, é mediar a professora Glenna Batson. E essa interlocução que a gente pode ter no final, com algumas perguntas, se isso couber, se a gente conseguir. Eu sou um homem de 49 anos, sou branco, uso óculos tipo aviador, de padronagem de tartaruga, camiseta preta, tenho cabelos curtos, castanhos, olhos castanhos, e atrás de mim tem uma parede branca com alguns quadros e uma planta, um pouquinho de verde. Eu trabalho na Universidade Estadual de Goiás, sou fisioterapeuta, intérprete criador na dança também, e trabalho com preparação da poesia, da poética, do corpo em si, até chegar nessa poética. E procuro entender, né, assim, como dar potência ao gesto cênico, fazendo surgir uma poética que extrapola os sentidos em cena. Então, desse feito, mediar hoje a mesa, com o tema, né, Fontes de uma Epistemologia em Evolução, de uma das principais pesquisadoras na área, a professora Glenna Batson, me instiga e alegra ao mesmo tempo. Falando um pouco sobre o currículo da Glenna, por 5 décadas, Glenna Batson aprimorou uma abordagem transdisciplinar para o estudo da corporalização, o Embodiment. Envolvida na interseção da dança, da ciência do movimento humano e da somática, Glenna se concentra em várias disciplinas, como catalisadoras para o ensino, pesquisa, defesa de diversas causas e crescimento artístico pessoal. Ela possui mestrado em dança e educação, mestrado e doutorado em fisioterapia, é professora emérita de fisioterapia na Winston-Salem State University e continua sendo uma líder ativa de curso e mentora no ensino superior e no serviço comunitário. Ela ensina Somatics, Embodiment for the 21st Century, no programa de mestrado em dança da Duke University. A Glenna foi fundamental no estabelecimento da Associação Internacional da medicina da dança no início dos anos 80. Em 2019, ela recebeu o prêmio honorário pelas suas contribuições à ciência da dança, pelo Conservatório Trinity Laban, em Londres. Entre 2009 e 2016, ela foi uma pioneira também na pesquisa sobre dança improvisada e doença de Parkinson, e continua sendo uma consultora ativa de iniciativas de artes pela saúde, local e internacionalmente. Por 29 anos, ela foi docente do American Dance Festival, levando a somática para a educação e o treinamento de dança. É especialista sênior da Fulbright, residente na Estônia, Bath, Spa, Reino Unido e Londres. Autora de Body and Mind in Motion, Dance and Neuroscience in Conversation. Ela também é coeditora colaboradora do livro Dance, Somatics and Spiritualities, Contemporary Sacred Narratives. Desde 2013, co-cria uma abordagem de pesquisa baseada na prática chamada DFOLD as Somatic Artistic Practice, com a artista de dança e multimídia Susan Sandler. Glenna acredita no poder da corporalização como um catalisador para transformar os desafios presentes em nosso mundo atualmente. Seu ativismo se estende à co-direção do QNC, o capítulo do estado da Carolina do Norte do Cure National, uma organização de base dedicada à justiça criminal por meio da defesa do fim do encarceramento em massa e das sentenças extremas. Então, sem mais delongas, com um currículo desse, não precisava nem eu estar falando, a gente vai abrir com muito prazer para a professora Glenna. Um prazer recebê-la aqui, professora.
Thank you very much. Obrigado. Bom dia to all. That is the end of my Portuguese. And I am honored to have been invited to this warm gathering with a wonderful array of vibrant faces before me. I grew up with a typewriter, so this world of the virtual is something miraculous. At the same time, there's a big challenge. This is really not going to be a lecture as such. I would rather it be a conversation. And of course, we're not in the studio. So my hope is to reach you and be reached by you across the screen as best as possible. What I'm hoping to do today, first of all, I want to thank everyone. Thank Diego for inviting me, the translators, the sign language friends, and all the participants in this. What I've heard so far has been extremely amazing to me, just the way in which Brazil has taken this work and has opened so many portals of learning. So that today, what I'd like to do is really talk about where I've come from in the last 10 years. Number one, I'm no longer a dancer, but I'm a woman who dances. So I'm still involved and engaged in a number of different movement studies. I'm no longer even a somatic practitioner. I don't really use my hands that much to work with people anymore. And I'm not even that much of a scientific researcher that much, or in the academy full time. So what I am doing is evolving my own practice, which incorporates all of what and who I know. And when I first started out 10 years ago, looking at Parkinson's and improvisational dance, which was a piece of research I'm very proud of, I came really first from theory. I said, people with Parkinson's can move. They have the agency to move. Movement is in their bodies. I don't have to have them mimic anyone or look at the mirror or listen to music, none of it. They will move. And so I came from theory and went into practice. And in doing that, I learned a lot about what was really unique about somatically based dance and how we are still so in need of the descriptors, the movement descriptors that help us understand what movement is for all of us and what specifics movement trains when you're looking at an improvisational structure. So I want to talk just a bit about that in a more global context of this talk. And I'm realizing day after day that in somatics, we are not just merely applied practice, we are practice driven. Our theory evolves out of our practice. And over the many years I've been exposed to somatics, I find that what now science tells us are things that we knew long ago, but they explain them in very specific ways. And we are needing also to let our own language come together with science and help us understand, all of us, including the public, what it is that we're doing. So with that, I'd like to say that what we're going to do here is I'll just describe what I've done over these last 10 years and put it in a context which will show what I have loved to do from the beginning of my practice, which is I love to articulate between many different types of disciplines. When people ask me, where is home? I say, home is where we discuss and practice. It is not a place where I'm living. Yes, I have a bed and I have a home and I have a husband and I have a community, but the real home is the home that I share with all of you. And so in this coming together with articulating, particularly between languages that don't always feel very compatible to us, and even the word epistemology is a big word. It's like, I'd rather describe it with my hands. Epistemology, what is that? Could you even describe it yourself? A gesture. We all talk about embodiment, but what's non-embodiment? Could you imagine what that would look like as a movement? Impossible. So this fundamental weave of embodiment and movement is where we all find common ground. And I'm going to share my screen now so we can begin a series of slides. I hope you all can see that. So I'm going to say, where am I, actually? And I give an homage, I give tribute to the original custodians of the place where I am living. It is a place called Pittsboro, North Carolina, but its original inhabitants were the Haliwa-Saponi tribe of the Native American nation. And in giving tribute to that, I know that every time I take a step outside my house, I am on sacred ground. I'm welcomed by nature, by life that has far exceeded me and gone before me. And I also give homage to many teachers, and I can't name them all, but I know even in somatics, I studied with Moshe when he was alive. I was in Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen's first summer training program. I study continuum with Emily Conrad. And my real mentor originally was Irene Dowd from the Legacy of Idiokinesis. I studied with her for 4 years. And Irene was very much a person who loved to bring science and somatics together. And so that was where my love was rooted for this work. And of course, there's Alexander technique. And I studied with many of the original teachers there too. But as we all know, we don't really become our practice. We do something that transforms it from the inside out, and it becomes something else. And it becomes you in the way that you interrelate and co-create in the world. So we're going to do the first somatic thing, which is to break the habit of anticipating what comes next. So I'm going to ask you to take a moment and take 10 full seconds to slowly lower your eyes and close them. 10 full seconds to do that. And noticing in the 10 seconds how you did that. Because of course, with somatics, it's not so much what you do, but how you do it. And we realize that at the core of somatics is something rather profound. The brain is an organ of reaction and prediction. What just happened? Whoop. And what am I going to do? And what somatics does is gives you that window of presence between reaction and prediction. We are so much more than motor. So thank you for joining me in that moment. Looking at Thomas Hanna, and he gave us the word somatics, and also the science of somatology, which was what he hoped to be the science of human narrative, our experience. And he wrote about the science of somatology as early as 1969. And to me, somatics has always been a struggle and a challenge between individuality, the self, and unity, the collective, and the interaction between the two. So we're always looking for what's common between us and also what's our own. The word proprioception means one's own. The word perception means seeing in relation to. So we are at once connected and ourselves with ourselves, but also co-creating in the moment as we interact with everyone. So a hallmark of somatics is we find the vocabulary, the language for our own experience. That's the hardest part. We can use words like feeling and sensing and awareness and so forth and so on, but they really don't, they're not specific. There's something vague, which is also important. It's important to understand that vagueness is part of it. That thing that's not quite known, not quite understood, not quite there. This is a key thing in our understanding what authenticity is. And when I give Hannah's writings to my current students, I have a very mixed group of students. Many are African American who have had very little access to somatics, for example, and other nationalities and people coming from different classes and places and roots and families. And they look at his language and their eyes roll back in their heads like, this is really beyond me. I don't understand this. And it takes quite a while before we can bring that sense of self and first person and third person understanding now in contemporary language. So we owe a great debt to this rich legacy to Thomas Hanna. But what if he had been born a woman, or born of indigenous origin, or born a different time in the Anthropocene, more a millennial? What would it look like now that we have? So for quite a while, I was interested in this particular paradigm. I got quite interested again, first in this sort of meshing of embodied cognition and dance and somatics. And I looked first at the work of Maturana, Humberto Maturana, Chilean, and Francisco Varela, also Chilean, and the work that they put out quite early in the 80s called autopoiesis, the self-regulatory capacity of the cell. And Varela went on to develop this concept of embodied mind with even Evan Thompson, Eleanor Roche, and a number of other colleagues. And Varela was quite a Renaissance man. He basically was a biologist who became a neurobiologist, who became a neuroimmunologist, who became a cognitive scientist, who was also a Buddhist. So he looked at the sort of contemplative mind. And he evolved a series of values to describe what embodiment is. And they all have the letter E before them to best explain what these values are. Embodiment is embedded, it's situated, it has a context. It is emergent. It is not just preformed and then becomes something. It is not just thought and then action. It is in the making of thought and action and the reciprocalness of perception and action in which we find emergency. It's anchored in ecology. It's evolving. It's enacting. Enacting is a little more than acting. It's acting from your values, from your morals, from your ethics, from your sense of connection to people, as opposed to you just do something mindlessly. It's extended through technology and empathic. Now, some of these words are ones that I also added, like empathy. So in this dismantling of Cartesianism, we start to see this framework evolve, interestingly, along the same time as Hanna's work. Varela began in the 60s to put his theories together, and he died, unfortunately, too early in 2004. But all of that time, just as with Thomas Hanna, we're seeing the evolution of a kind of philosophy of life, a lived philosophy, a living philosophy. And of course, another person working alongside Thomas Hanna is Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen. And I know you're quite connected, in love with, enamored. Bonnie is wonderful. She is truly the beacon, like a beacon, who tells us about what embodiment and an embodied mind of tissue is. And here we have something quite unique, because she's saying, well, embodiment is a birthright. She's not the only person who said that, but she said it in specific ways about the need for automatic presence, that you don't have to worry about where embodiment is, search for it, try to find it. And it starts at the level of the cell, rooted in cellularity. And so interesting, the brain being the last to know. In the work I'm going to describe later on the fold, which I call it, what I used to call human origami, I first looked at the embryo and realized the embryo builds a body with no brain. We know this. I'm sure many of you know this. Within 14 days, boom, you have a body that has directionality, it has vitality, it has life, it has interaction, and it's connected to its matrix, and the matrix being connected to the world. So it is certainly not just a function of the nervous system, nor is it genetically determined. And at the bottom is love. So that's a huge evolution, even within this time frame of mid 20th century into the millennium. So this is a slide that doesn't work so well in Portuguese, but in English, the word epistemology has the word stem in it, which can mean to you like a root. But stem, I think of as stem cells. These are pluripotential cells. They can become anything. They can regenerate. And so who are the stem of the self? What is the stem of the self? Who is the stem of the self? We certainly have our biological stem cells, ancestral and indigenous, parental. You can read the slide. But when we think of ontology, we can't neglect the fact that there is an inescapable network of mutuality that we cannot ignore. That phrase, the inescapable network of mutuality, comes from Martin Luther King Jr. So we not only have a birthright, but we have a matrix that is who we are. I'm giving you a moment. So if freedom to move is the birthright, and movement is really so basic in all that we are, what is the need that's left? And I like to think of it as just, again, our epistemology of somatics is going to be definitely intertwined with movement descriptors, the way we can understand movement. What is movement? Why does it matter or mean? And here we can't neglect the fact that we are fundamentally resonant and relational and interactive. And we have to capture all these things that before were not easy to capture. I can tell you lots of stories about the beginnings of the Dance Science Association, where there was just no talk of somatics. We really had to fight to bring it to the table because you can't nail it down. So we, in our celebration of difference and our celebration of all these things that we gain in somatics, we're very, very connected to this idea of articulating what is our sense of movement. Right? So I like the word languaging as opposed to language. And the word languaging first came from Maturana, Ferrella's mentor, was way back in the 1980s. And also from a couple of other articles, which I'm happy to put in the chat later, if you'd like to know about one in particular. But I use the word languaging because it means something more effective and captures more ephemerality and emotionality than just simply language. Often if you try to read about language, it will lead you into a much more instrumental and mechanistic idea of a system that is there for communication. Well, you know, language is really our body in motion and all of our interactions and all of our messy engagement with each other and the world. Another moment to breathe. So in moving in myself in these last 10 years, I really would say I moved from a more logos perspective, thinking very cognitively about things, going from theory into practice, much more into what I would call mythos, the mythic world, much more opaque, muddy, slippery. So 8 years ago, I started working with a woman named Susan Sentler, who I met at Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance in London. And we started looking at playing with improvisation, first with visual and then kinesthetic prompts. We had a week of visual prompts and then a week of kinesthetic prompts. And we looked at the difference between the two with a group of students, wonderful students. And we found interesting things, but we realized we weren't done yet. So I started something. I wanted to evolve a practice that I hadn't been trained in, something new. So I was reading the phenomenologist Gilles Deleuze, who wrote a book on the fold, which happened to be a metaphysics about Baroque society and about the world in general. He reframed reality as a continuum. So he abolished a lot of Newtonian ideas about what reality really was all about, time, space. Now, I didn't read a lot of Gilles Deleuze, but just a little. He's quite hard to read if you're not a philosopher. But one phrase really jumped out at me. And he said, I'm going to paraphrase, the smallest unit of matter is not the point, but the fold. And as soon as he said that, something really touched me here in my heart. It's about this endless continuum of enfolding and unfolding. And there I started with exploring human origami, first biologically with embryology and anatomy and so forth and so on. And then it took off and is now called the fold as somatic artistic process. So the work I'm doing now has a lot to do with making through folding and folding through making. And in that, all along the way, Susan and I create a mesh work, a matrix in which all of us, most of us online now, of course, can play with this idea of micro folding and macro folding and unfolding. And also we work with multimedia materials, paper, fabric, film, photography, and objects and so forth. It's really quite an experience. But it's not really about folding, even though folding is the most fundamental of our movement repertoires. This is what we do in the beginning, and through the rest of our lives, we fold and unfold in various patterns. But it's more about the way we create language. Once again, we're not interested in being the teachers as much as we are interested in gathering the words, the thoughts, the ideas from the people we work with and starting to really weave a much larger understanding of the themes we have explored, many of which have been things like dissolve, decay, saturation. These are the themes we work with. So they don't have anything at reference. I reference so much for so many people, and at the same time, they mean nothing until we explore them through the fold. Too bad we can't do that today, but I would be happy to organize something later if you're interested. So one of the ideas we worked with is something, it's a process called the palimpsest. And when you were a child, you might have had this toy that was a pad of paper, and the top part was like cellophane, and you could write on it, and then you could take it and lift it and erase everything. But there were still little bits and pieces, little traces on the page. That's a palimpsest. This is the way ancient people wrote and passed on knowledge. Their epistemology was to write in wet clay, and then they would wipe it away and then write something else. And there were still traces that would surface, that would rise to the surface. And you would begin to understand that we're not just looking at history, we're looking at historicity, which is really an array of events that then have their own timeline, their own incredible complexity of experience all woven into that. So the palimpsest is more than a metaphor for us. It's really a place where we can disclose and uncover and unveil and open up what was once erased or rubbed out. Freud even used the idea of palimpsest as a metaphor for memory. Obviously, that's, metaphors only go so far, but we are etched. Yeah, we are etched. We are engraved in ways that we can recover, and that through letting go of habitual ways of moving through our folding practices, we can describe we can uncover a new universe of our own experience. And it's not just us. So another area of practice that I have been engaged with, which is not the fold, is I'm part of something called the Women's Social Dreaming Matrix. The social dreaming matrix is not new. It was a psychological process that was developed in the 1980s in the UK. And what people would do in the social dreaming matrix, it was mainly for psychoanalysts who would be in a room together, but not looking at each other and sharing dream fragments. Now, the point of sharing these fragments was not about themselves. It's not the dreamer, it's not the dreamer, it's the dream and whatever is shared. Because then people begin to realize, oh, that was also in my dream, and in my dream, and in my dream, and in my dream, in another place. And we begin to see that we are weaving each other's dreams. We are immersed in the matrix. Matrix, the root of the word matrix, means mother. So the reason I'm in when I discovered this work, I was at Duke with a man named Michael Klean. Some of you may know Michael. He was running the master's program at Duke in dance, and he was using social dreaming matrix as a springboard, as a way of getting ideas for choreography. Well, in what I'm in, we're not doing that. The Women's Social Dreaming Matrix is there for me to understand more about my work in the fold, because there are three things that happen in the fold. One is what I call liminal, crossing a threshold from everyday life into a more transformative potential. We're in a potential. The word liminal coming from Victor Turner, the anthropologist. Littoral, what that means is things that wash up on the shore, on the beach. I'm sure you've all had that experience of going to the beach, and here are these little things that you find. And they are like, they spark something in you. They excite something in you. They bring up something in you. They touch you. And you're touched back by that. So littoral, washing up from the shore. And then singularity. Many of you may know the singularity from the work of Andre Lepecki, who also, I believe, was influenced by D.D. Huberman, and who in turn was influenced by Deleuze. And many people go into this idea of singularity, which doesn't necessarily mean singular as much as it means something about strangeness and about event, that in time space, it's not that there's a thing happening, but there's a whole interrelated complexity and perplexity, questioning of what that is. We don't know all of what that is. So in the fold, went backwards. We know that we are working with liminality, littoral, and singularity, among other processes, which we're trying to write up. All right, where's my little mouse now? He disappeared. And then there's a whole other realm that is starting to come into my thoughts about what is involved in this work of the fold and of somatics in general, because I'm not trying to say that what I'm doing is necessarily that unusual or different from what other people are doing. All of these things touch all of us. but to think in terms more of a sense of a physics and philosophy of being. Where do other ideas come together in this epistemology of the growing somatic lexicon? And we've talked a little bit about the ontology of becoming. I think even to dance is to become, to walk out the door is to become, to lift a cup of coffee is to become. But there have been various people who are now a little bit more contemporary, I guess, who have written quite interestingly about this area of ephemerality. What is an experience that we can't quite grasp, that has the potential, the possibility of understanding the complexity of what we're in. So these two pictures, the one on the, I guess it's on my left, I don't know, I guess it's on your left too, is the latest and most detailed representation of the cell, the human cell. And the one on the right is by an Aboriginal, an artist from an Aboriginal culture who is the granddaughter of a very well-known artist named Emily Gungware. Now, I was struck by the way in which those two things appear paired, the way physics and philosophy of being are paired, the way an understanding of how something reaches towards us and grabs us with such ferocity that we cannot ignore what that is. Because when we recognize the degree to which we are interwoven in the world, interactive and interdependent, and then we see, we're touched, we are met, we are seen. So maybe some of you have read the ideas of Karen Barad, the physicist, theoretical physicist, feminist Karen Barad. She talks a lot about entanglement, not as something that's a big mess, but as a series of obligations. We are obliged, we are engaged, obligado. I love that word. What a wonderful word. And then also the aesthetics of kinesthesia, just bringing in aesthetics. It's something that we're still not quite comfortable talking with these days because a certain kind of other issues of the Anthropocene and our dystopic times and so forth are kind of covering over. But aesthetics is a vision we still need to really bring forward. And so in the fold, we really do this. And last but not least, what is imminent, what is really already there, but at the same time holds the amazing presence and potential of what is and what can be. We are overwhelmed and in awe. And that, I think, is what makes somatics the most exciting field going. And we also work with curating. Curating comes from the Latin word cura, to care. We care for one another. So when we are working with the things in the fold, we work with objects where we're constantly curating the room, and putting things and making things with paper, writing, putting them in the room, moving with them, and so forth and so on. That this caring for one another and this co-creation makes us custodians of our art making. So we are always co-creating. We're not just by ourselves, even though we are in a room alone for the moment. And finally, the word anarchiving. This is a word that was coined by cultural theorist and philosopher Erin Manning. She also has this wonderful book called Relationscapes and many other books, where again, she looks at the co-creative process of languaging, where really we're looking at that we're constantly doing a feed forward kind of work. We're not looking back and documenting something so we can put it in a museum or put it even digitally, digital archiving being its own bit of a quagmire at the moment to try to make sure that we're really being truly representative of our experience. but it's what I call wayfinding forward. The things that we write, all of our journals, all the things we share, these are traces that are not inert, but carriers of potential, she says. So an archive becomes a place from which to depart and from which to pass through and to go on. And I think it's a very vibrant and active concept of archiving, so that, you know, we're never really stuck at trying to make an object or trying to finish something or fix it in any way, but just to know that it is growing, forming, continuing, and so forth in this process making collectivity of all of what we're doing. And another person that I've been quite interested in is Tim Ingold. He wrote, again, many books. He's an anthropologist in Glasgow, Scotland. And he talks about the idea of lines, because he believes that lines and knots and things such as that are not objects, but they are processes and that make us, that really tie things together. It's what walking and observing and storytelling and singing and drawing and writing, that all are the same because they're connected through this idea of lines. It's a fascinating book if you've not read him. So he says, you know, a line, writing is the craft of line making, not the other way around, which I find a real paradox for thinking, that we want to think about lines as something that's so vital in our somatic incorporation that we know that through the lines, through the folds of those lines comes writing, you know. So, and then also, it's also for language. It's like a line is not the perfection of language, but language is for the perfection of line. So Tim Ingold really has a lot to say about forward-making creativity. We are always on this navigation, this travel, this place to go, and just maybe stopping for a moment, hovering, not really going beyond, and certainly not anticipating. So that it's not that we think something and then we make and then thinking happens. And so this is Tim's work, and very useful to think about this whole process of how we create a language, an epistemology that is written for somatics. So I like this particular phrase just because we are dealing again with kinesthetic data and its ephemerality. And this comes from a book on language. And how interesting to think that these Tibetan monks would print the pages of their charms and formulas on water. So that in a way, we abandon this idea of ownership. We are not the sole owners of anything. We are not the sole source of anything. We can barely even trace back some of where we got things from. It's impossible. We are sourcing from everywhere. In English, source is not a noun, it's a word, sourcing, maybe in Portuguese as well. But the idea behind all of this is that we are appropriating all the time. We are taking from this and taking from that. We just have to appropriate appropriately. We can't misappropriate. So if you know where a source is, of course, you would say, you give homage to things, but know that we are never the sole owner or repository for any one thing. So this is really the last slide, and it's the last slide we ever show when we're doing a fold session, which is just simply to enter. And enter what? That enter into the collective, enter into the unknown, enter into that place where nothing is finished, of new beginnings, of becoming, of the deep intersection, the corporeal intersection of ontology and epistemology. And it is through those deep experiences, physical, metaphysical, corporeal, carnal, that our words come, And from there, there's so much wonderful scholarship that we can draw from, which will then say, oh yes, this ties to this and this ties to this. We start to build an amazing constellation of things, of our experience. So we want a living epistemology, one that just says, as we know that somatics is a lived and living philosophy, epistemology is as well. And this is our charge. We have a lot of work to do. The best books are yet to be written. The best offerings are yet to be offered. And so you are all part of that. And know that at the bottom of it is our freedom to move. The Dance Studies Association, which is a very well-known organization for scholarship here in the US, in 2020, they came out with a statement about the invincibility of movement, the unbreakableness, the unchallenged idea. You cannot explain non-embodiment with a movement. It's impossible. And as all of this experience is our birthright and our right, it's like a Bill of Rights, which I'm really quite interested in honing as well, the whole Bill of Rights. But just to end on the fact that hopefully this talk has given you some food for thought. Again, it wasn't posed so much as to define for you what epistemology is, because I think you have plenty of people who can do that and can frame it in very beautiful and wonderful ways, as we heard from Isabelle Genot, and there'll be other wonderful speakers here at this conference. So thank you for your attention, and I wish you well. I hope we meet again on the dance floor.
Muito obrigado, Glenna, pela palestra brilhante. Com certeza, muitas coisas aproveitáveis e de profundo interesse. O que eu acho que nós podemos fazer agora é receber, então, no chat, vocês podem escrever perguntas ou comentários e a gente fazer uma interlocução entre Glenna, Diego pode entrar, e aproveitar mais a professora ainda. Fiquem à vontade, então, no chat. Obrigado novamente, professora Glenna.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Com licença, eu só quero acrescentar que a gente pode tentar também, caso as pessoas queiram, a gente pode trabalhar com o ícone de levantar a mão, né? A gente pode ver quem é que gostaria de fazer a pergunta, abrir o microfone, só basta levantar a mão. Nós seguimos essa ordem, Adriano e eu vamos aqui verificando.
Então,
a
gente,
Júlia
levantem a mão. A Júlia
já levantou a mão aqui. Eu vou abrir o microfone.
Obrigado, Diego.
Hi, Glenna. It's nice to meet you. First of all, I really appreciate that you are sharing your knowledge. It's really wonderful that I want to ask you, what is your advice for the students that are starting this searching about the epistemology, the somatic epistemology.
Yes, Julia, thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. I
Yes.
always start with the etymology and the dictionary. That's where I go first. I want to know the root of what I'm talking about, where it comes from, because then I know the cultural, social, often political understanding of the word. So I don't go immediately to the scholarship as such. I try to find a way just from the word roots and from synonyms for that word, what it really means. That's what I do with almost everything. And you can make a tree, the word in the middle, and it branches in many directions. And then from there, you can choose. Do you want to go more with philosophy and phenomenology? Do you want to go more with science? Do you want to go more with cultural studies or communication study? What's the next direction? Because there's so many directions. So you would want, I think, to go with what you are particularly interested in, and no doubt you have a thread of study. You have an idea of for yourself what studies you like particularly or are drawn to. And then you make sure you try to read the critique of those studies. For example, when I talked about Varela and, his idea of the embodied mind, it's been very well critiqued by Maxine Sheets Johnstone. She calls it motorology. It's just another form of brain privileging, the nervous system always privileged and all that. I don't want to diverge from your question. Did I answer it well enough, or do you need more?
Yes, thank you so much, Glenna.
You're welcome.
Eu vou, Adriano.
Diego, sim. Nós temos duas pessoas com as mãos levantadas. Ferri, parece que é esse nome, e André Jabor. Eu não sei quem levantou primeiro.
Andréia. Eu vou abrir para
André, por favor. Obrigado.
Thank you, Glenna. Boa tarde, bom dia ainda. Nossa, muito encantada e agradecida com essa palestra maravilhosa. Fiquei muito instigada, com muitas coisas que ela traz, fantásticas. E aí, 2 pontinhos. No final, ela comentou alguma coisa sobre um grupo que tinha uma investigação. Eu perdi um pouco o final da fala dela, que ela comentou sobre the invincibility of movement, um grupo que estava pesquisando alguma coisa. Não sei se eu perdi ali o finalzinho, essa primeira coisa. E fiquei, ela também, quando estava contando do Fold, ela falou que se a gente estivesse interessado, que ela também poderia abrir uma brecha para a gente ter uma vivência disso, alguma coisa também. Fiquei, tipo, eu quero. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. In the chat, I put the Dance Studies Association 2020. If you look for the statement, it's a statement on movement, and it will, if you can't find it, I'll find it for you and send it to Diego. He can give it to everyone. They I have been trying over the years to develop an embodiment Bill of Rights. We have many Bill of Rights. They're all fabulous, wonderful, necessary, critical for now, but none of them speak to embodiment very much. You know, like I have the right not to have my attention pulled in every which direction every 5 minutes. I have that right, but it is not respected. So when I saw this from the Dance Studies Association, I said, oh, great, you know, the invincible, unbreakable right to move. And my social justice work is looking at prison reform. I work with people who are incarcerated for life, and they live their whole lives in a space that is 2 meters by 3 meters. And I say, oh my God, you know, talk about right to move. There is no right. That is the biggest right taken away. They can't move. So this is much to say that it would be great sometime to just host a session on the fold. I'd be happy to do so. I'm not trying to sell my work by any means. It could be free. We just do it. We just come together and jam. Yeah, we have a jam. That would be fine. Yeah. Thank you.
Obrigado, Andréia. Agora, a Ferri, por favor.
Obrigada.
Não sei se seu nome é esse. À vontade.
Okay, hello.
Hello.
Hi, Glenna.
Hi.
So I'm gonna ask you in English because I'm actually from Texas. But I have been living in Brazil since 2007. I learned dance technique in Brazil. So I never learned dance technique in the States. I am the daughter of 2 immigrants. So on my mom's side, my mom is Mexican and my dad is from Pakistan. So in my house, I had one side that I grew up dancing in my family reunions with my mom's family, which we love parties. Then my dad's side, it's way more conservative. Wasn't allowed to dance. So I am a translator by trade, and language is a big thing for me. And one of the things I'm curious, and it's one of the things that I am into, especially since I started dance technique with already these somatic approaches. Mm. And one of the things is this it's very culturally white in many ways. Mm-hmm. And I bring this to your attention because not all languages are written.
Right.
And so how do you teach a class, or how do you conduct a practice, or is there an experience with groups that do not rely on written languages, or even how are somatic approaches approached in cultures where the language is not so linear? Like Arabic is in a different direction, Japanese is in a different direction, Chinese is not even an alphabet, it's character language. The language is constructed in a different way, and these are already neuro-linguistic, psycholinguistic things. Mm-hmm. Language affects our perception. So how, in this case, if we really want to diversify, or maybe have a more diverse network, and what I feel like there's just more of a perception that is has more of a foundation because of the written language, and then maybe these other groups that don't have this access, this kind of language, like what happens to their bodies? Because I think of myself like I've been dancing technique for 8 years, and many times I'm like, oh my God, what body did I have a body before any of this? because sometimes we need the word in order to formulate the idea. You know, like they say that the Native Americans, when they saw the ships, they didn't see ships on the sea because they never saw ships, so they didn't have the word for that, so they didn't see anything.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a big question. I'll try to answer, at least from my own practice. Right now, the fold is taught in 2 languages, English and Italian. Those are the only 2 we've worked with so far. Now, when I say taught, it means that we use very sparing language. It's not like I'm talking to you now. We go immediately into a somatic dive or experience, and we use just 1 word, 2 words, maybe a phrase. We also use a lot of visual imagery. We do PowerPoints with imagery. We allow people to draw, use photography. They can make kinetic stills, they can draw, they can film, they can do everything they want to do. And we've had people who were not primary English speakers, but they still got it, yeah, because they were allowed to express themselves through other media. That's been the way that we've at least been able to cross some of those differences you know, like if we're talking about the palimpsest, they can write any way they want to, you know, and then we'll ask them maybe, you know, put something on top of that, you know, crumple it up so you can only see parts of what's in there. We're not looking linearly at anything. So, you know, if I just take this piece of paper and I go like this, well, there's something written on here, but at the same time, what's really interesting about this is not the words, but the shape and the shaping. And it's the shaping that makes the important experience. So we don't care what the words are, really. You know, we have scripts, but they're never, ever scripted beforehand. We're always working off what people put in the chat. We use their words, even if it's in another language, as long as we can read it. And we offer them to give words forward and let that percolate into people's bodies. So you can see the way we're sort of working here improvisationally. We don't anchor onto any one kind of language or the way you do something or imitation or none of it. It's just, and I agree with you about dance. I mean, if you think somatics where you train dance is still white and privileged, I mean, my mother danced with Ruth St. Dennis and Hanya Holm. Now, I grew up and there was no such thing as anything but white modern dance. I mean, that I knew. I mean, you know, so I grew up in a household where other mothers were baking cookies in their kitchens. And my mother was doing the Lagong dance, you know, in some play, I mean, I just grew up with this very unusual introduction to dance, but it was still very culturally conditioned. So, you know, Susan and I are aware of this work in that way. And we're always, when we have a workshop, of course, now we're forced to be on Zoom for still probably some time. You know, people come from, you know, the Pacific coast of the US to Singapore. I mean, we've got people in there who work from all over the place. We never know who's there. Some of them, I've also started to offer this work to people who have Parkinson's. And I work with a soundscape artist who does electronic layering of sound because she is very interested in audio origami, how sound folds. And she creates these soundscapes as she is watching what's going on in the room and hearing my 1-2 word direction to people. And what's amazing is that these people totally can follow and they're finding movement that they never thought they had, you know. A big piece of the work is silence in between words. So it's not what's said, but what's omitted and where that interval is for people to have time, which is not something people are often given enough time, even in somatics, to really let something sink in. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's some of my thoughts on the matter. Yeah.
Ok, obrigado, professora Glenna. E aos participantes também. A Luana perguntou para mim, talvez o Diego clarifique, possa clarear isso, ela queria os links dos artigos. A Luana está pedindo. A referência foi mandada para todo mundo, Diego? A gente tem como mandar depois no chat, por favor?
Eu já ia mandar, já vou enviar aqui no chat para todo mundo.
Obrigado.
Tá?
A gente vai mandar então.
Sure.
Então agora a Raquel está com a mão levantada.
More, I might just send them along later.
Ok, obrigado, Glenna. Então agora a gente passa para a Raquel. Obrigado.
Raquel.
Agora deu. Hi, Glenna. Nice to see you.
Hello.
Welcome to Brazil. Bom, primeiramente, obrigada pela sua fala e por compartilhar com a gente as camadas e os seus aprofundamentos, né, de tantas décadas nesse campo. É muito inspirador. Eu sei que você é também professora, né, da técnica Alexander, e a minha pergunta é se você, em algum momento, se identificava enquanto especialista, né, eu sou isso, eu sou professora daquilo, ou se desde o começo você já não tinha esse interesse, já tinha essa abordagem mais integrativa. Hoje eu vejo, né, que você tem acesso a uma diversidade de fontes, né, e não de uma especialização. Isso é uma coisa que sempre te acompanhou ou foi chegando à medida do tempo? Obrigada, é isso.
Yeah, thank you, Raquel. When the screen went black at the beginning and we all had to close our eyes, that was definitely Alexander, right? It was, we're not going to end gain about this lecture. We're going to stop end gaining. I have been an Alexander technique teacher since 1989. I took my first lesson in 1981. I would have to say I'm of two minds. When I first started learning somatics, all I wanted to do was feel better. And that was way, way back because I had a bad injury. And so somatics helped me get back on my feet. So I just wanted to feel better. And I used to call myself, now I call myself the somatic junkie. You know, I was like addicted to somatics because it just made me feel good. It was great, you know. And a moment came when I said to myself, you know what? If this really works, it's going to work all the time. You know, when I am really faced with anything in life, not just a nice movement group of people like-minded, everyone's moving together is so beautiful and so forth and harmonious, and no. So I am shall we say, I have expertise in various things, but I like to think that my goal is to stand a little apart from it as a witness and say, how is it that I can bring other ideas into this that are compatible or not? So in a way, I'm always in and out. And that's very Alexander also, in that we are always with and away when we work with people. We are deeply with someone as we touch them, but we don't get lost in them, nor are we standing back and, you know, we're just separated, but no, there's lots of resonance there. So what I've found over the years is that my real skill, as I was a little bit alluding to in the beginning, is to help people articulate experience wherever it's coming from, rather than I'm a practitioner of this and I'm a practitioner of that, because I don't practice that much anymore for various reasons. I mean, the pandemic, of course, shut so much down, and I had to find another way to expand my work, and so the fold has been it. And I'm also so profoundly interested in new discoveries in other disciplines that I could never stay with one thing. I just was always, we say cobble together, like a zapatera, it's like a cobbler. I'm always putting something together and making a mesh of something. I don't want to just be one. I can't. I never could. I started in 3 Feldenkrais trainings. 3. I paid my money, went to the first year, and decided I will never practice like this. Never. So I guess I have to say that in the end, I'm, in that wedge of somatics and artistry. There's design and somatics, and there's a way in which they come together. And I have to build on the strengths I have, which is as a teacher, to see what is before me and find ways of bringing everyone together, regardless of what the technique so-called is. Like I always say to people, the person who is the teacher is not the one who knows everything, but the person who senses the anxiety in the room and brings everyone into the learning circle and can do that. And this is what I've wanted to do. So I've found over the years that I, needed to pull away from any kind of orthodoxy, especially where touch is concerned, and work as I've intuitively felt strong. And so we hopefully will be touching each other once again, not in the not too distant future, with regularity, but for now, I've had to use other parts of my somatic skills to enter into teaching and learning. And to me, they're both the same thing. So I'm not sure I'm answering. Am I answering the question? Yes? Okay, thank you.
Sim. Muito obrigado, professora Glenna. A gente está chegando ao fim, gente, 5 minutos, e a gente tem algumas coisinhas. Tem um pedido, né, para uma participação, uma prática com a professora Glenna. O Diego responde que ele vai tentar pós-evento. Por conta da correria, a gente não consegue fazer tudo. Foi colocado já no chat as referências pedidas, tá? Para vocês darem uma olhada. E agora a gente tinha Sylvie. Sylvie, are you still willing to talk? Yeah, she's with your hand. Please, Sylvie.
Tudo bem, eu já vou abrir o microfone. Eu já vou abrir o microfone da Sylvie, que não pôde estar com a gente aqui, né, Sylvie? Por um infortúnio, ela estava como convidada. Eu já vou abrir o microfone. Só quero avisar que nós vamos, como nós começamos 12 minutos atrasados, nós vamos passar 12 minutos, 15 minutos a mais do tempo. Tudo bem para você, Glenna?
Sure.
Ok, então, vai passar 15 minutos, então a gente pode seguir com as perguntas aqui. Vou abrir para a Sylvie.
Okay, thank you very much to give me a time. It's precious. Glenna, you've been my mentor for years. And listening to you, I went back in the 90s when I did my PhD, and I was trying to understand my research question at this time was, what are the organizing principles of somatics? And at that time, to find an answer, I did an ethnographic study looking at your teaching, talking with you for 6 weeks at Duke University. And I came to understand, because at that time I thought that movement, if we do a plié, a tendu in classical ballet, we start with the feet and it travels into the body. And through your contact, I came to understand the idea of integration. There isn't one door to start from, something. And I realized that today it's the same question that we are addressing. What are the organizing principles of somatics? A long time ago, we used to epistemology to go from the simpler to the more complex. And now we are not at a place going from the more complex to the simpler. It's not that. And within the constraint of our culture, because we are not an Aboriginal culture who grew up with everything altogether. So we have constraint. So for example, when we teach, it's such a challenge to share with people who are in this dominant world of simpler to complex, and to arrive to share, because they are at this place too, in a way. I think you understand my question, and I don't have to blah, blah, blah more. Because as people who like sharing, transmission, it's a big challenge. You talk about how when you teach, when you talk about that Hannah, it goes over the head of your student. So now, can you talk to me more about your tricks? About sharing this issue. Dancers who want to have the feet pointed in a way.
Yeah. Oh my God, what a question. Of course, coming from you, you should be here, not me. So one way, there's several things that come to mind. Number one, I sometimes use little games with people, like, if you partner together with a person and one's partner A and partner B, and partner A has to describe what embodiment is, and only with words, no gestures at all, no facial expressions, no eye expression, no nothing, right? Just blank. And then when they change, the other one has to do what's non-embodiment and only gesture, no words, and then they begin to understand, oh, right, I mean, this is so basic. Yeah, so basic. But I think one of the things I also do is I talk about the fact that all of these things are stories in a way. These are part of our stories. Science is a story. It's not the truth. Yeah. And even in somatics also, it's a story. And if we know that stories come from not only a place of complexity, but perplexity, that they are open questions for us to understand. And part of what I try to get people to do is to back up assumptions that they already have about themselves and about the body and about work. I mean, many of the people who come into the class think that somatics is a Pilates class, for example. And I'm not trying to minimize anybody or anything about this, but that's all they know. Yeah. And they don't have a sense of what would be a way to, in a sense, go underneath their understanding of control. This is a big piece I work with for the very beginning of the classes, is getting people to think about control and notice themselves controlling. Like, it's very hard for a dancer to stay still and not try to finish a line in their body. If you say, okay, now imagine or sense that there's, energy flowing somewhere in your body. And all of a sudden, you see people finishing the line. Well, you start to realize, no, we're not trying to finish anything. And we're not trying to be in the driver's seat, always doing something. Or, if I even get someone to lie in constructive rest and I say, okay, nose, right shoulder, left knee. Well, that's not somatics either, right? I mean, it's just like, as soon as I say a word, they go right to that place, then the attention goes there. And so how do they get to move by way of and in concert with their attention rather than with control? And we just do, the thing that seems to work most for beginning students, for me, I have found, is to go to bone. It's the most fundamental, most interior, most dense, most, shape oriented. There's so many things about bone that you can use, but you could start anywhere, as you said. And often, the hardest piece is to get people to really, really, really slow down I mean, I make reference to, there's an art historian here at Harvard named Jennifer Roberts, and she takes her students into a gallery, and she puts them in a room with one painting for 3 hours. They can't come out. And they have to take those 3 hours and write down what they noticed. And, you know, first you can imagine the frustration, the irritation, the annoyance, the this, the that. It reminds me a little bit of, you know, the old time Feldenkrais people who would make you stand for 10 minutes. Not doing the Steve Paxton idea of small dance. No, just stand there. Yeah. And people would just get fatigued and tired and angry and this and that. And, you know, it's really being faced with your control, with your levels of control, with your ideas of aesthetics and deportment, how you carry yourself, and all these sorts of things that we have to get underneath. And there's no one way. Certainly there's no one way. I guess I have to just see what they're doing. You know, when I ask them to do anything, you know, starting with the simplest of exercise of, you know, standing there and feeling your feet imprint into the ground. I mean, you know, I've had people faint. It's just like, whoa. So I know that when I enter that room with the teaching, it's just not about me. That's one of the things I think, that's not about me. And I have a vague idea of what I want to do, but maybe there's a story that starts in the beginning of the class, and that's the class. It takes off because somebody started something, and everyone has entrained to something that is of interest that we can take into movement. So I'm not sure I have tricks for you.
Actually, no, it's not about tricks as much as patience.
Big time patience. More than patience.
Path, individual path. Yeah, it's about patience, probably, my question.
Yeah, really. Well, I tell people, I say, well, imagine, you know, think about the time you fell in love with someone. You know, did your eyes just look at them and you went, oh, hi? I mean, you know, no, you didn't, right? You didn't like let your eyes look at that person for an instant and then turn away. You really looked, and you looked again and again and again, and you were touched by and touched back. And so that takes more time than we're often given. You know, my class is very short. It's like 1 hour and 20 minutes. What do you do with that? It's really short. It should be 2 hours and 20, you know, well, I don't have it. So, and I know that everyone comes in with trauma, for example, but I don't start there. If something like that comes up, I use a phrase that was from the educator Bell Hooks, and I say, well, these things definitely mark you, but they don't define who you are and determine who you are. You know, we have a chance to find new ways for ourselves that allow us to feel freedom in our bodies. So, I don't know, we could talk about this for days. You know, I think it's a very interesting subject. It's kind of like when I was putting all this together, I thought, well, you know, it really came down to what is movement and why does it matter anymore? And how do we get people to understand, I mean, you know, what it is and how it can become meaningful without imposing on the person.
Thank you very much, Glenna. For everything, for all those years.
It's just great to see you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Muito obrigado, Silvi, e professora Glenna também. Gente, eu acho que a gente vai ter que fechar as perguntas. Nós temos mais 5 perguntas e nós temos somente 5 minutos. Então, eu vou tentar fazê-las rapidinho para a gente cobrir as 5 perguntas, tá bom? Vamos tentar. Então, na fila agora... eu tenho...
one answer for all 5.
Pode ser. Eu tenho Glenna. A Glenna pergunta, você poderia nos contar um pouco sobre o seu trabalho envolvendo a doença de Parkinson e a improvisação? Como as questões sobre cure, care, abordadas por você agora há pouco, podem ser convocadas nesse tipo de trabalho a partir da somática? Essa é uma. Como ela sugeriu, eu vou fazer todas, tá, Glenna? Eu vou continuar. O Camilo pergunta, tem algum... Is there any movement descriptors for blind people? Is embodiment visible? E aí nós temos na fila Letícia, vamos dar um tempinho, daqui a pouco a gente abre, ela responde essas duas, e depois Dana e a Joana Tavares, depois eu faço da Joana. Vamos ver se dá tempo. Obrigado.
Okay. Well, we have to start with agency, what I call agency, you know, that, like I said, people with Parkinson's have something within them that will move them. It's just you have to give them the opportunity to let it come out. And I believe in improvisation as a method rather than mimicking. It's not that you can't learn, those things are all good, that, you know, if you follow and dance along with someone else, that's fine. That's just not my particular way of researching, but I'm always interested in how people actually can find for themselves a way to move themselves. So that relates to whether the person has Parkinson's, whether they are blind or either acquired blindness or born congenital blindness, and whether embodiment has to be visible or not. No, it does not. But I found that if you get people together in a room and you get them improvising, there's always some way that they'll move. And now how we describe that, it depends on what you're going to do with that material. For example, the stories are obviously the most important part, what each person experiences and can articulate. And usually from those stories, you'll find that there's a way in which there's a thread between the stories. One person's story may really link very nicely to another people's story. So we start to then say, oh, okay, we're looking at hesitancy, the way people hesitate before they move because they either get stuck or they're afraid or something. Hesitancy, and it's in everybody's story. So you say, okay, that's a common word, and that's how we can start to evolve the descriptors. You see what I'm saying? Or maybe it's that when they start to lift a foot, they all fall over, right? You know, why? Because they're all moving from their head first instead of shifting their weight somewhere else. So you say, there's a common thing that's happening here. And there's your descriptor. And they tell you, oh, I lost my balance. Well, that's all they can tell you. So you've got to fill in the gap. What did you see? You've got to fill in the gap a little bit. But you can start to really see a number of descriptors. Maybe that's it for now.
Yes. Obrigado, professora. A próxima é Letícia. Por favor, Letícia.
Hello. I'm Letícia from São Paulo. About touch. Recently, in a conversation with André Lepecki, he said that in New York, in the school for children, like 4, 5, 6 years old, the teachers are not allowed to touch children. So if some children has anger or has like too much violent behavior or improper behavior, they can touch, they can hold, and they call the cops, the police, and police go to school and take them away. Another thing that I've heard, that this is not happen just in school, but there's an issue, a problem about therapists or teachers or not being allowed to touch children or students. If is that so, And at the same time, there are so many people in the United States working with touch and movement and therapy. How is this relationship, if there is any movement from the professional or people who really want to
I'll give you an idea, because I know we're very short on time.
Okay, thank you.
Put a ball between the students. Put a pillow between the students and start to have them move the ball between them. They're not touching. No one's touching them, but they're still getting the idea behind what you're talking about. They can work out anger. They can work out joy. They can work out, anger will be transformed into joy as soon as I can't, I don't have a partner except myself, but whatever I do with this ball, right? Right? Or a pillow, soft pillow, and I have to move it between people, then they're touching. Or another really wonderful one is using a long string of threads, sewing thread. One person puts it in their mouth, the other person holds on with their finger, and they move around the room. They can feel each other, completely feel each other at a distance. You can use all kinds of ideas like that, you understand how to feel a person at a distance. I can't change the laws. I'm trying. I work with organizations that try, but I'm not very successful. I also worked in a mental institution where nobody was going to touch anybody at all, period, for anything unless it was medical, and it was very, very difficult to get people to behave properly without drugs, because they need, this is a human need. So I can't change the laws, but I can create a world in which no matter what touches me, right, that now is telling me, oh, yeah, I can do something with it. Yes, it can be something that I begin to realize is part and not part of me. And it can be passed between people, tossed between people, and so forth. If I touch just the smallest little side of it and see how light it is, oh, right, very light. Then how do I get that lightness in my body? How do I pass the light? How do I receive light? It's all there. I think we're done, yes? Thank you. Thanks very much, Leticia.
Tá mudo, Adriano, tá mudo. Abre o microfone.
Alô? Estão me ouvindo? Sim. Two more questions. Duas perguntas to end it. Dani, se você puder ser bem direta. Obrigado. Just two more. Thank you.
Oi, vou tentar ser direta. Eu queria agradecer porque minha I'm saying that my cells are vibrating with your talk and your presence here. Thank you.
Welcome.
Minha pergunta ela é bem de ordem conceitual. Eu estou nesse momento fazendo doutorado a partir sobre a epistemologia do body mind centering, and I saw that I have articulated two concepts that I believe they can be articulated, but I've read some people that don't believe it. You have articulated autopoiesis, autopoiesis, and entanglement from Karen Barad. And reading Karen Barad, she's saying, oh, autopoiesis is not a good concept because it's too centered in the individual organizing itself alone. And then she proposes the entanglement, the interaction as a, I don't know, as I understand. And I would love to hear you talking about this, please.
I don't think I have time to really give it justice, but I will say that this has been, this idea of the individuation and the collective, the self and the other, the community and the so on. This is still the struggle between in understanding somatics, because we have resonance, vibration, you know, energetic qualities. We have all these things that we pass between us. They're not just, you know, words or touch even. So there are people who are studying these things, scientists who are also working with somatic artists and who are particularly contact improvisers, who are working with resonance, for example, or kinesthetic sharing or something like that. You might want to have to put it into something like that, you see. Rather than, oh, gee, I have to be, you know about theoretical physics and I have to know about, you know, neurobiology. Well, you know, we can only know so much, right? Barad's work is wonderful, but not always the easiest to understand. And it's the same with Maturana, you know. So I would suggest I can give Diego a couple of articles and he can send them around of if anyone knows who Asaf Bakrak is, he's working with a number of places in Paris who are looking at resonance and other forms of ephemeral experience through contact, improvisation, and touch with scientists. And so if you're looking for a definition or an understanding of it, it's certainly one way to look at that. You could also look at Erin Manning's work, because she talks a lot about it. The way she describes entanglement would probably be a better idea than Maturana's idea. We are looking at self-regulatory processes. These are all self-regulatory processes, but with the self doesn't begin and end at the skin. We know this. So when we say self-regulatory, we should say self/other regulatory. It's almost like the problem we had with mind-body. What do we do with that word? You know, which is still problematic. So, you know, it's the processes through which we communicate with ourselves, with others, with the world, with the divine. I don't know which layer of reality you want to connect with, but these are the processes. Thank you. Good luck.
Muito obrigado, então, novamente a todos, todas e todes. A gente precisa encerrar, ainda tem perguntas, então acho que ficou claro que a gente precisa de mais professora Glenna, não é verdade? Talvez para uma prática, talvez para mais diálogos, então a gente já deixa uma sementinha aqui, Diego faz o meio de campo aí, talvez. Então, muito obrigado novamente, um grande abraço, obrigado, professora Glenna, e o nosso congresso continua. Participem, está sendo muito bonito. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado, Glenna. Obrigado, Adriano. Obrigado a todos e todas. Obrigada a nossa tradutora, Tatiana, que ficou com a gente até aqui. E o Joab e a Jéssica, intérprete de Libras. E a gente continua com a programação e eu entro em contato depois, Glenna. Muito obrigado e bom dia. Boa tarde.
Goodbye, but just for now. Ciao.